Hamid Karzai has been sworn in for a second term as Afghan president, following an election mired in fraud and strong doubts about his legitimacy. Can Karzai gain the confidence of the Afghan people, even as his traditional supporters in the West voice their increasing concern at his corruption? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Mariam Namazi. President Hamid Karzai gets 5 more years to govern Afghanistan. He took the oath of office as the US-led war stretches into its 9th year. Record numbers of soldiers and civilians have lost their lives in the war, while many more have lost faith in Karzai's leadership. But Karzai has promised reforms. In his inauguration speech, he said he'll ensure his ministers were both competent and just.
The next 5 years confront us with great responsibilities and duties. We will try our best to implement social, judicial and administrative reforms in our country.
Well, Karzai's previous term was marred by allegations of corruption. He has vowed to tackle the issue head-on.
Corruption is a very dangerous enemy of the state. We will soon organize a conference in Kabul to organize new and effective ways to combat this problem.
Well, corruption concerns have been widely expressed by world leaders as well, including the British Prime Minister Gordon Brown.
Following the inauguration this week of President Karzai, I am urging him to set out his contract between the new government and its people, including early action on corruption. And I welcome today's announcement that the government in Afghanistan will dedicate the next 5 years to fighting corruption. I have pledged UK support in this effort, but we will require this effort to be undertaken.
Well, joining us today are our guests in Kabul, Moin Morosky, a member of the Afghan Parliament. Also in Kabul, John Dempsey, head of the US Institute for Peace and a rule of law advisor. And in Boston, Michael Semple, former deputy to the European Union Special Representative for Afghanistan. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Michael Semple, if I can begin with you, what are the expectations of President Hamid Karzai?
Hamid Karzai now has survived the election and has a chance to seek legitimacy amongst the Afghan people by behaving like a president, as the Afghan people understand that. Over the next 5 years, he will try to reach a new peace deal in Afghanistan. He will try to negotiate with the opposition, bring them on board to provide an opportunity for an eventual withdrawal of the foreign forces.
Moin Morosky, for Karzai's first inauguration in 2004, US Vice President Dick Cheney attended, along with 3 former US presidents. This time you had US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Pakistani President Asif Ali Zardari. What can we read into the fact that Western heads of state did not attend?
First of all, it was a great pleasure for the people of Afghanistan that we have taken the second steps towards democracy, and we have elected second time our president according to the right of the people, according to the constitution of Afghanistan. And you have seen probably today, and you have heard from the media that representatives from the various countries, including United States, and British and countries from the region, especially neighboring countries, President of Pakistan, Vice President, and representative of the Islamic countries, they were present today in the inauguration ceremony of President Karzai.
They were certainly present, sir. I'm sorry, but I have to point out that actually, under the Constitution, the winning candidate needs more than half of the available votes cast in a national ballot, and Karzai didn't get that.
It is true that on the first counting, President Karzai got 54.6%, but there was questions which fraud was involved in other questions from the other candidates. So the vote, when they counted again, so it came just a little bit under 50%, which was only 15,000 votes. But the candidate who was the strong opposition against President Karzai, he didn't stand for the second round. So if someone doesn't stand for the second round for the election, so according to the rule of the election, to the Constitution of Afghanistan, in the rules of the Election Commission,
okay, well,
whoever
John
is
Dempsey,
the first,
do
the
you
one
agree?
candidate left.
Well, first of all, I think that the Constitution doesn't address this point. If one of the runoff candidates drops out, what then happens? And I think it was in everyone's interest that we put the election season behind and moved on once Abdullah decided to pull out of the runoff. I think he felt it was going to be equally, if not more, fraudulent than the first round, and people recognized that it was time for Afghanistan to move on and that there were more important things to address than simply extending what was a difficult and fraudulent election process.
Michael Semple, will Karzai's comments on combating corruption go any way to satisfying the international community, particularly the Americans?
No. I think that one of the outcomes of the election is that it's been a wake-up call for everyone. I think what you have to understand is now its actions are going to speak a lot louder than words. Nobody is going to take this on face value. They're going to be following it, day by day, step by step.
Moin Morosky, U.S. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Admiral Mike Mullen said Karzai's legitimacy among Afghans was, quote, at best in question right now, and at worst doesn't exist. That's a pretty damning assessment of Karzai's credibility at this point in time, isn't it?
I think he's a legitimate president for the people of Afghanistan, because the other strong candidate, Dr. Abdullah, didn't stand, and he doesn't want to stand for election. So what the Independent Election Commission decided, they had the power that, and they had that power to decide for the presidential position. We had only one candidate. If someone doesn't stand for the election, so definitely this is the process. The first that one candidate should have won. So the legitimacy of the President Karzai is not only the announcement of the Independent Election Commission, which we had support from the international society straight away after the announcement from the United Nations,
well, Michael
from
Semple,
United States of America.
do you think that there will be any attempt to curb Karzai's powers by strengthening the parliament and devolving more power to the provinces?
I think the first way in which President Karzai's powers are going to be curbed is by the emergence of the first legitimate Afghan opposition since the Bonn process back in 2001. I think that sort of these hectoring comments from Western leaders really have limited impact inside Afghanistan, but the fact that the runner-up candidate is sort of still in the field as an opposition figure and has committed himself to work for reform in the Afghan government, but staying outside of the government, is going to mean that Karzai is going to be watched all the way, not just by the foreigners, but by other representatives of his own people.
John Dempsey, what are the chances of an effective opposition emerging anytime soon? I mean, according to Karzai's main election opponent, Abdullah, the solution is to have a constitutional lawyer, Jirga, which could amend or rewrite the constitution. Realistically, what are the chances of that happening anytime soon?
Well, a constitutional lawyer, Jirga, has to be called by the president. And I think if a lawyer, Jirga, was to convene, it could open a whole can of worms, and they would start to review the Constitution, not just on some of the specific provisions that have been problematic over the last few months, but actually try to overhaul the entire system of governance, and that could severely limit President Karzai's powers. And so the question would then have to be asked, why would President Karzai do that? Abdullah, as Michael said, is going to stay outside of the government, at least that's what he stated publicly, and he could begin to form a viable opposition. But unfortunately, in Afghanistan, political parties have been quite weak, and so it's going to take some time and real concerted effort to try to build that into a credible opposition.
Moin Morosky, how effectively Hamid Karzai can tackle corruption and indeed build up Afghanistan's institutions will depend very much on the team he has in place, won't it?
Corruption is a very dangerous enemy, not only for the state of Afghanistan, but for the international society, especially for those countries who are supporting Afghanistan financially and politically. And what President Karzai said today, and he promised during the inauguration ceremony today, he will work very hard, and he will have a strong government and skilled and expert members of the cabinet who had no bad name in the society in the past, and who were known or are known in the society of Afghanistan. And we hope this issue, especially the corruption, we cannot clear that from the society until we do not have the support from the international society to work together with the president and with the government of Afghanistan. And as far as we are concerned, that international society, especially those countries who are supporting us financially.
Well, okay, let me put that point then to John Dempsey. John Dempsey, in response to criticism of his government, Karzai has argued that donor countries are also partly responsible because hundreds of millions of dollars have been poured into Afghanistan for development and infrastructure projects, and those funds have been somewhat mismanaged, haven't they?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, certainly corruption affects both sides of this. The international donor community has been responsible for some of the mismanagement and waste. But I think the point is that if we're fighting an insurgency in Afghanistan, we need to have a credible partner in the Afghan government. And the levels of corruption that we've seen over the last few years that continue to grow have been so problematic that it's going to take a very concerted effort on the part of President Karzai with international support, but also others in his cabinet and elsewhere to start to fight this. And what they need to establish is a truly independent anti-corruption commission. Right now they have a high office of oversight that's tied too closely to the office of the president and is therefore having its hands tied. An independent anti-corruption commission with the ability to investigate and prosecute crimes is what Afghanistan needs now.
Michael Semple, there is a great deal of focus now on who Karzai is going to appoint to his cabinet. Is he stuck between a rock and a hard place? Because on the one hand, he has to please the West in terms of their demands of addressing corruption, bad governance. But on the other hand, he needs to balance that with domestic pressures in order to satisfy many of the warlord allies who helped him come to power.
He's been in this place before. I think that on balance he will probably say sweet things to the West and accommodate those people he believes he needs to accommodate in Afghan politics. But it's not just a question of who he appoints to the cabinet. The problem of corruption and the problem of appointments go a lot further down. If you look even at something as basic as border police commanders, if to become a border police commander you have to pay a bribe of $100,000 or $200,000, then you will concentrate on recouping that money through smuggling rather than defending Afghanistan's borders. So Karzai is going to have to ensure that he and the people working under him are combating corruption at that level to increase the effectiveness of both the government and its security forces.
Moin Morosky, a 2008 survey by Integrity Watch Afghanistan found that a typical household pays about $100 a year in bribes. That's a lot of money for the average Afghan household. There seems to be a culture of corruption in Afghanistan. How difficult is it going to be to change that?
It is a fact which in the past 30 years in Afghanistan, we had no proper government in Afghanistan, and we had no constitution, and there was no system in Afghanistan, and we have started to establish the system in Afghanistan after the Bonn Conference, which is since 2001. So we have started. It is a new state, it is a new country, we have new rules, new constitutions. It will be very difficult in in the next 5 years also, probably because the majority of the people of Afghanistan, they were involved in the corruption. And I think the people should support the government also. They should take part for a clean government, and they should not support the corruption. They should stop supporting the corruption of Afghanistan. It's not only the responsibility of the government. The people of Afghanistan should support also.
John Dempsey, what's your take on that? This isn't just the government's responsibility, that they need support from the people in combating corruption.
I mean, certainly everyone bears responsibility to fight corruption and not to pay bribes. But when you have government officials at all levels demanding bribes for basic services, and without which you won't have those services and your needs met, then it's incumbent on the government to be the leader on this.
Michael Semple, how likely is it that the government is going to be the leader on this, as John Dempsey says, given that this is Karzai's last term under the Constitution, he can't run for election again? Will he be more amenable to tackling corruption and bad governance because he doesn't need to worry about that?
It's a question of whether he starts to take it a lot more seriously than he has taken it over the past 8 years, and that's going to really see whether there can be pressure put on him, not from Western countries and people giving speeches in London, but actually from inside Afghanistan, from the opposition, from the parliament, from Afghans who stand up to it.
Moin Morosky, you seem to have a class of government officials and indeed their relatives who don't want to change the status quo. Even Karzai's own brother, Ahmed Karzai, has been accused of drug trafficking. He denies that charge. Is Karzai's circle ready or willing to implement change?
I think the circle which is around Karzai, if they are involved in the corruption, President Karzai should work for that. If they are very close people to him, or if they are working close in his office or outside in the government. And that circle, if the circle is involved in corruption of Afghanistan, he should consider it seriously, because now this is not only the pressure from the international society, which we have to work anti-corruption. This is the pressure from the people of Afghanistan. We, the people of Afghanistan, want also that from this enemy of the state, enemy of the people of Afghanistan, which is corruption, we should have clean government, we should have a clean country, and we should stop these disasters which was happening in the past.
I just want to talk about the security situation in the country now, because during the inauguration ceremony, Kabul was effectively under lockdown. Roads and neighborhoods in the capital were closed. John Dempsey, what does that say about the security challenges Karzai is going to have to deal with?
Well, clearly, security is the #1 priority for the new administration. And whenever there have been large-scale events like today's inauguration, the city is effectively shut down. I think it reflects the fact that insurgents have made some very high-profile attacks in the past in the center of the capital in broad daylight. And the Afghan National Security Forces and even the international security assistance forces are unable to prevent all such attacks. There was an attack today in the south of Afghanistan, a suicide bomb that killed 10 people, and I think that clearly reflects that the war is ongoing. What I didn't see from President Karzai today in his speech was a sense of urgency and a sense that he is a wartime president. And I think that was probably the biggest drawback I saw in his speech today, where he didn't address the fact that we are fighting an insurgency, and this is the #1 priority for the country going forward.
Moin Morosky, what's your take on that Karzai should really have said more about the extent of the security challenges facing the country right now?
What he mentioned today in his speeches during the inauguration, he announced he will implement the Loya Jirga, and he will call the oppositions, armed oppositions who are fighting against Afghanistan under the name of Taliban or other Islamic organizations and parties. And we should work with them, especially with those who are unhappy and they have taken part from the society of Afghanistan, and they are fighting We should sit with them and we should talk to them. This was one of the part, and it was one of the priority in his speeches, which was the security. And if we don't have the security, we cannot help the corruption. We cannot have. We will not have a good government in Afghanistan if we don't have the security.
Let me ask you to pick up on that point, because the Taliban seem to be staging increasingly bold attacks. 5 foreign UN staff were killed in a suicide attack on a Kabul guest house last month. That attack was unprecedented in its nature. How difficult is it going to be to turn this situation around? Because right now the Taliban seems to be very much on the offensive.
I think that inside the Taliban, there is a debate ongoing which parallels the debate which we've heard in the international media. There's one set of Taliban who are telling their supporters, push a bit harder, the Americans are defeated, they'll run away, we'll topple the government, we'll grab power and re-establish the Islamic Emirate, and any sacrifice we make is worthwhile. There's another tendency inside the Taliban which is saying, you've been telling this for the past 8 years, we've lost thousands of our people, we've destabilized the country, we've destabilized Pakistan, there's no sign of the Americans running away or the government being toppled shortly. The question is, which of these two tendencies is going to win out? If those pragmatic Taliban who realize they do not have a chance of capturing Kabul, if they win out, then there's a chance of some kind of meaningful political engagement, whether it's in the shape of a loya jirga or some kind of negotiating process, so that they actually agree to accommodate each other, and Afghanistan can look forward to a peaceful future. If, on the other hand, the militant wing in the Taliban wins out, persuades young men that there is some chance of them toppling Kabul, which they will not do, then of course we're in for the perpetual war of attrition, and Afghanistan will continue to be devastated and Pakistan to be...
Sorry to interrupt you. We're running out of time, but John Dempsey, just put all this into some perspective for us. How would you compare the situation in Afghanistan 5 years ago, when Karzai was first inaugurated, to the one we have now?
Well, things have changed dramatically. 5 years ago, in 2004, I remember in the lead up to the inauguration, there was the sense of optimism. There was people in Afghanistan expected that the reconstruction efforts were going to lead to real palpable improvements in their lives. And over time, as the insurgency gained steam, as criminal networks started to rule with impunity, as the rule of law was not implemented, I think there was a sense of frustration that Afghanistan was heading in the wrong direction, and that frustration still holds today. I've not seen, in the 7 years that I've lived in Afghanistan, a sense of crisis like I see right now. There's a lot of tension among the international community, and Afghans are certainly frustrated, and I don't think that any inauguration speech is going to make the difference. It's clearly going to be how the Afghan government behaves going forward, and whether they are holding themselves accountable to the rule of law and trying to improve governance. By improving governance, people will look to their government as more legitimate, and I think that is the greatest weapon that we have against the insurgents right now.
Well, thank you very much indeed, John Dempsey. In Boston, Michael Semple, and in Kabul, Moin Morosky. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We, of course, welcome your comments and suggestions. Email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.